3 months after the fall of the Galactic Council, Jake Morrison stood in what had once been the High Chancellor's private chambers, now converted into a command center for the new Terran Confederation. The view from the massive windows showed a very different scene than before. Where once Council ships had patrolled in rigid formations, human vessels now moved with purposeful efficiency, coordinating with ships from dozens of former client species who had eagerly joined humanity's growing alliance. President Laura Mitchell's image appeared on the main communication screen, transmitted from Earth where she was addressing the newly formed Galactic Assembly. Her speech was being broadcast to every inhabited world, a deliberate mirror of the trial that had triggered the transformation of galactic civilization. "Citizens of the galaxy," she began, her voice carrying the authority of a species that had proven its strength beyond question. 3 months ago, the former Galactic Council made a fatal error in judgment. They believed that might alone gave them the right to rule, that age granted wisdom, and that newer species should accept subjugation as the natural order. Jake smiled as he listened, the same cold expression that had terrified alien leaders across the galaxy. The transformation had been even more complete than human planners had dared hope. Council fleets had surrendered with minimal resistance once they realized the scope of human preparation. Rebellions on member worlds had toppled governments that had ruled for millennia. The careful structure of galactic civilization had collapsed like a house of cards once its foundation was removed. Captain Tony Evans entered the command center carrying a data pad filled with reports from across human space. "Sir, the latest numbers are in. 47 former Council species have formally requested membership in the Confederation. 12 more are negotiating terms. Only 8 are still holding out." Jake accepted the pad and scrolled through the data with interest. "And those 8? Tony's expression became grim. "The Saurian Empire, what's left of it, the Mantari hierarchy, a few others who still think they can restore the old order." Jake nodded thoughtfully. The holdout species represented exactly the kind of thinking that had led to the Council's downfall. They could not accept that the galaxy had changed, that their assumptions about power and dominance no longer applied. "Any word from Counselor Vextar? He's broadcasting from some hidden base in the Outer Rim, calling for a holy war against human expansion," Tony reported. "His remaining supporters are organizing what they call a liberation fleet." Jake's smile widened slightly. Vextar and his allies were about to learn the same lesson that the original Council had learned, but apparently some species required multiple demonstrations before they accepted new realities. Specialist Nicole Turner approached with her own report, this one containing intelligence gathered from across the galaxy. "Colonel, our deep space monitoring networks are detecting interesting patterns. Several of the holdout species are attempting to form alliances with extragalactic entities." This was more serious news. Jake had always known that humanity's rapid rise to dominance would eventually attract attention from powers beyond their current sphere of influence. "What kind of entities?" Nicole consulted her data pad with a concerned expression. "Unknown, sir. The transmissions are using quantum frequencies we've never seen before. Whatever they're talking to, it's not from this galaxy." Jake considered this information carefully. Humanity had achieved dominance through superior planning, intelligence gathering, and tactical flexibility. They had defeated the Galactic Council because they understood their enemies better than their enemies understood them. But extragalactic threats represented unknown variables, and unknown variables were dangerous. Former High Chancellor Morden was escorted into the command center by human guards, his compound eyes dull with defeat. The once proud insectoid leader had been broken by the collapse of everything he had believed in, but Jake still found him useful as a source of information about galactic history and politics. "You wanted to see me, human," Morden said, his voice carrying none of its former authority. Jake gestured toward a chair designed for Morden's physiology. "I wanted to discuss your former colleague's attempt to contact external powers. Tell me about the deep-range protocols." Morden's entire body went rigid with surprise. "How do you know about those?" "We know about a great many things, Morden. The question is whether you're going to help us understand them or whether we need to find other sources of information." The former Chancellor's compound eyes twitched as he considered his options. The deep-range protocols were established millions of years ago, long before my species achieved spaceflight. They were created by the ancestors, the first galactic civilization. The protocols are supposed to be activated only in case of existential threat to galactic civilization itself. Jake leaned forward with interest. "And your surviving colleagues believe humanity represents such a threat." "They believe you represent something worse," Morden replied quietly. "A successful challenge to the natural order. If younger species can overthrow older ones, if intelligence and preparation can defeat age and accumulated power, then everything they believe about the universe is wrong." This was exactly the kind of thinking that Jake had expected. The former council members were not just fighting for political power or territorial control. They were fighting for their fundamental worldview, their belief that the galaxy should be ruled by those who had ruled it longest. Admiral Pete Johnson's voice came through the communication system from his flagship in deep space. "Colonel, we're detecting massive energy buildups in the Saurian home system. Looks like they're preparing for something big." Jake stood and moved to the tactical display, where red indicators showed the positions of hostile forces. "How big?" "Admiral, planet killer big, sir. They're charging some kind of ancient weapon system that our sensors are having trouble analyzing. Whatever it is, it's drawing power from their entire star system." The implications were clear and terrifying. If the Saurians were willing to use planet-killing weapons, they had moved beyond conventional warfare into the realm of genocidal desperation. Jake realized that humanity's victory over the Council had pushed their enemies past the point of rational calculation. President Mitchell's voice continued from the ongoing broadcast, her words now taking on new urgency as human intelligence networks detected the growing threat. "The Terran Confederation stands ready to defend all species that choose freedom over subjugation, cooperation over domination, and progress over stagnation." Jake activated his communication link to all human command centers across the galaxy. "All stations, this is Colonel Morrison. Initiate Protocol 7. I repeat, initiate Protocol 7. Protocol 7 was humanity's contingency plan for exactly this situation, the point where former enemies became so desperate that they threatened the existence of entire worlds. It was the darkest option in the human playbook, but the Saurians had left them no choice. Across the galaxy, human sleeper agents who had been positioned on key worlds for months began activating systems that even their own commanders did not fully understand. Weapons that used principles of physics that the Galactic Council had never imagined began powering up in response to humanity's greatest fears. Jake Morrison looked out at the stars and realized that the easy phase of galactic conquest was over. The former council had underestimated humanity's capacity for planning and violence, but the real test was just beginning. Now, humanity would discover whether their intelligence and preparation were sufficient to face threats that came from beyond the known galaxy. His smile never wavered, though it had taken on a quality that would have frozen the blood of any alien who saw it. Death still wore a grin, and death was far from finished with its work in the galaxy. The price of arrogance was about to be paid in full, and humanity intended to collect every last bit of interest. The phrase, "Remember the Alamo," had barely finished echoing through the chamber when the first explosions shook the massive council station. Emergency alarms began wailing in frequencies that hurt alien ears, and the lights flickered as power systems struggled to compensate for massive energy drains. Through the transparent walls of the tribunal chamber, beings could see flashes of weapons fire as the human fleet engaged the station's outer defenses. Jake Morrison remained perfectly calm as chaos erupted around him. The energy restraints holding him had mysteriously deactivated, though he made no move to leave his chair. Security Chief Kralnock lunged toward him with a weapon drawn, but the massive alien suddenly stumbled and fell, clutching his throat. A small dart protruded from his neck, fired by Danny Torres from a concealed weapon that the Council's security scanners had somehow failed to detect. "How?" High Chancellor Morden demanded, his compound eyes darting between the human prisoners, and the battle raging outside. "Our sensors showed no human ships. Our security systems detected no weapons." Jake stood slowly, brushing imaginary dust from his diplomatic robes. "Your sensors were looking for the kind of ships and weapons your technology could recognize," he explained patiently. "The problem with being a galactic superpower for millennia is that you stop expecting genuine surprises." Admiral Pete Johnson's voice crackled through hidden communication devices that were suddenly active throughout the station. "Colonel Morrison, this is Retribution Actual. Package delivery complete and gift wrapping removal in progress. What's your status?" Jake touched what appeared to be a decorative pin on his collar. "Package received, Admiral. The shopping list was very comprehensive. Proceed with checkout." Counselor Vexitar finally understood what had happened, and his scaled hide turned a pale color that indicated terror in his species. The diplomatic mission was a cover. Everything was a lie. Jake's expression became thoughtful, as if seriously considering the accusation. "Not everything, Counselor. The application for council membership was genuine. We really did hope for peaceful coexistence." His smile returned, colder than before. "But we also planned for the alternative." The station shuddered again as human weapons found their targets with surgical precision. Colonel Maria Santos led her Special Forces teams through corridors that they knew by heart, thanks to weeks of careful reconnaissance. Dr. Helen Foster monitored biometric readings from hidden sensors placed throughout the station, tracking the locations and stress levels of every important council member. Connor Murphy coordinated the tactical assault from his position aboard the command ship, using intelligence gathered during Jake's diplomatic questions to identify critical systems and eliminate them in precisely the right order. The Council's defensive strategy was textbook perfect for repelling conventional attacks, but completely inadequate against an enemy that had spent months learning their weaknesses. "Your fleet," Morden managed to say through clicking mandibles. "Where did you hide an entire battle group?" Jake gestured toward the viewing windows, where human ships could now be seen moving with deadly efficiency through the station's defensive perimeter. "We didn't hide them. We built them. Every component, manufactured in deep space using materials from asteroids your sensors had already cataloged and dismissed as natural objects." The implications hit the alien leaders like physical blows. While they had been dismissing humanity as primitive newcomers, human engineering teams had been constructing a fleet literally under their noses, using stealth technology that made their ships invisible until they chose to reveal themselves. Danny Torres, who had shed his role as a nervous aide and now moved with the fluid precision of a trained operative, was systematically disabling Council communication systems. Each device he touched sparked briefly and went dark, cutting off the alien's ability to coordinate any response to the human attack. The trial was broadcast live across the galaxy. Jake continued conversationally, as if they were discussing the weather rather than the systematic destruction of galactic civilization. Every species that has ever felt oppressed by Council arrogance just watched you sentence peaceful diplomats to death for the crime of asking inconvenient questions, Captain Tony Evans reported in from the station's command center, which his teams had captured with embarrassing ease. "Sir, we have control of their communication arrays and defense coordination systems. Multiple Council member worlds are reporting internal uprisings. Looks like they had more enemies than they realized." Jake nodded with satisfaction. Human intelligence had spent years identifying species that resented Council dominance, secretly, providing them with advanced weapons and tactical support while maintaining plausible deniability. The broadcast trial had been the signal for coordinated rebellions across dozens of worlds. Specialist Nicole Turner's voice joined the communication network from her position aboard an intelligence vessel. "Colonel, we're intercepting surrender. Offers from 17 Council fleets. They're requesting terms for cessation of hostilities." The remaining Council members in the chamber looked at Jake with expressions of growing horror as they realized the scope of what was happening. This was not a rescue mission or a punitive strike. This was the complete dismantling of galactic civilization as they knew it, planned and executed with terrifying efficiency. "Impossible," whispered the ethereal representative, their gaseous form rippling with distress. "Humans are barely 2 centuries into spaceflight. You cannot have the resources for such an operation." Jake's grin returned, and this time there was nothing diplomatic about it. "You keep making the same mistake. You judge us by your own limitations." He gestured toward the chaos outside. "Did you really think a species that fought 2 world wars, survived multiple extinction events, and colonized hostile worlds would be intimidated by bureaucrats who have grown soft from centuries of unchallenged power?" The station's gravity generators fluctuated as human teams took control of critical systems. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows as the normal illumination failed. Through it all, Jake remained the picture of calm professionalism, as if the destruction of galactic government was just another item on his diplomatic agenda. High Chancellor Morden made one last desperate attempt to regain control of the situation. "Even if you destroy the Council, other species will unite against you. Humanity will become the greatest threat the galaxy has ever known." Jake considered this for a moment before responding. "You're probably right about that," he agreed cheerfully. "The difference is that we're prepared to be the threat, while you were just prepared to be victims." Admiral Johnson's voice filled the chamber one final time. "All objectives secured, Colonel. The galaxy is ready for new management." Jake straightened, his diplomatic jacket, and looked around at the broken remnants of the Galactic Council leadership. "Gentlemen, ladies, beings of all descriptions, I believe our negotiations have concluded satisfactorily." His smile never wavered as he spoke. "Humanity thanks you for this educational experience. We've learned so much about galactic politics, the Last thing the council members saw before human security teams escorted them away was Jake Morrison's grin, cold and predatory, and absolutely certain of victory. Death had indeed worn a grin, and its name was humanity. The trial was set to be broadcast across the entire galaxy, a public demonstration of what happened to species that dared to challenge the Galactic Council's authority. Jake Morrison sat in the defendant's chair, his wrists bound with energy, restraints that glowed softly in the dim lighting of the tribunal chamber. Danny Torres sat beside him, sporting a bruise on his face from where Security Chief Kralnock had struck him for asking too many questions about their detention conditions. Hi. Chancellor Morden stood at the prosecutor's podium, his chitinous armor polished to a mirror shine for the cameras. Behind him, a massive display screen showed the charges against the human delegation: espionage, terrorism, threatening council security, and something called species sedition, that Jake was fairly certain they had invented specifically for this occasion. "Citizens of the galaxy," Mordoon began, his voice amplified and transmitted to billions of beings across hundreds of worlds. "Today we witness the consequences of allowing primitive species to believe themselves equal to their betters. The human known as Jake Morrison came to our station under the pretense of diplomatic contact, but investigation has revealed his true purpose. The evidence they presented was fabricated but convincing. Hidden weapons that had mysteriously appeared. In the human quarters, encrypted communications devices that definitely had not been there when they arrived, and recordings of conversations that Jake was absolutely certain he had never had. The council had put considerable effort into building their case, which told him more about their long-term intentions than any intelligence report could have. Councillor Vexitar took the floor next, his scaled hide gleaming with the oils that saurians secreted when experiencing intense satisfaction. The defendant claims to represent a peaceful species seeking membership in our civilized community, but examination of human history reveals a pattern of violence, expansion, and resource exploitation that threatens galactic stability. Jake listened to the litany of human sins with apparent resignation, occasionally nodding as if accepting the truth of their accusations. But those who knew him well would have noticed that his questions during cross-examination were becoming increasingly specific and technical. When accused of monitoring council defense frequencies, he asked for detailed explanations of which frequencies and what types of monitoring equipment could detect them. When charged with mapping station security systems, he requested clarification on which systems were considered most sensitive and why. General Nathan Cross watched the proceedings from the command deck of the UHS Retribution, positioned just beyond the system's outer sensor range. The coded phrases embedded in Jake's seemingly desperate questions were painting a detailed picture of Council military capabilities, and Nathan did not like what he was seeing. The aliens had impressive technology, but predictable tactical thinking. Their station defenses were designed to repel frontal attacks from conventional forces, not the kind of asymmetric warfare that humans had perfected over centuries of fighting each other. Lieutenant Kelly Walsh looked up from her communication station with a grim expression. "Sir, we're receiving reports from deep space monitoring stations. Council fleets are mobilizing in at least 12 sectors. This isn't just about putting humanity in its place anymore." Nathan nodded grimly. Human intelligence had suspected this for months, but Jake's mission was confirming their worst fears. The Galactic Council viewed humanity not as a potential member, but as an existential threat to be eliminated before they became too powerful to control. The trial was just the opening move in what was intended to be a campaign of extermination. Back in the tribunal chamber, the proceedings had reached their Dramatic climax. Jake was invited to make a final statement before sentencing, and he rose slowly from his chair, the energy restraints making a soft humming sound as they adjusted to his movement. "Honored members of the Galactic Council," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. "I stand before you not as a criminal, but as a representative of a species that has learned hard lessons about survival in a hostile universe." Something in his tone made several council members shift uncomfortably. Jake's diplomatic mask was beginning to slip, revealing something underneath that they had not expected to see. "You speak of human violence and expansion as if they were moral failings, but we learned these skills through necessity," Jake continued, his smile becoming more pronounced. "Every species in this chamber achieved galactic dominance through conquest, but you did it so long ago that you have forgotten what it feels like to be truly threatened." Counselor Vextar slammed his tail against the floor. "Enough of this primitive posturing. The Council finds you guilty of all charges and sentences you and your delegation to public execution, to be carried out immediately and broadcast as a warning to all species who might consider following your example." Jake's smile became a grin, and for the first time since his arrest, he looked directly into the broadcast cameras. The change in his expression was so dramatic that several council members actually stepped backward. This was not the face of a defeated diplomat begging for mercy. This was the face of a predator who had been playing with his food and was finally ready to feed. "Before you carry out your sentence," Jake said, his voice now carrying a tone that made the translator systems struggle with unfamiliar harmonics, "I should probably mention something that might interest your viewing audience." He paused, letting the silence stretch out until every being in the chamber was hanging on his next words. "My name is not actually Jake Morrison, Diplomat. My real name is Jake Morrison, Colonel in Human Special Operations Command, and for the past 6 months I have been conducting the most comprehensive intelligence-gathering operation in human military history." The chamber erupted in shocked sounds from dozens of different species. Security guards moved to restrain Jake, but he continued speaking as if they were not there. "Every question I asked, every technical detail I requested, every security protocol I observed has been transmitted to human command in real time. Your station defenses, your fleet positions, your response times, your command structure, even the personal habits of your senior leadership, we know it all." High Chancellor Mordun's compound eyes were twitching rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation in his species. "Impossible. Our security systems would have detected any unauthorized transmissions." Jake's grin widened. "Would they? Tell me, Chancellor, exactly how many human ships do your sensors currently detect in this system?" There was a moment of confused silence before someone checked the sensor readings. The answer sent a chill through every alien in the chamber. According to their instruments, there were no human vessels within 3 light years of the station. "You see," Jake explained conversationally, "while you were busy being offended by human presumption, we were busy learning how your technology works. Did you really think we would come to a potentially hostile first contact with just a few escort ships and a smile?" The massive display screens around the chamber suddenly flickered and changed, now showing external sensor readings that told a very different story. Where moments before there had been empty space, dozens of human warships were suddenly visible, their stealth systems deactivating in perfect synchronization. Jake looked directly into the broadcast camera one final time, and when he spoke, his words were heard by every human settlement from Earth to the Outer Rim colonies. "Gentlemen, ladies, beings of all species watching this transmission, I want you to remember this moment. Remember what happens when someone makes the mistake of threatening humanity." He paused, his grin becoming something that would haunt alien nightmares for generations to come. "Remember the Alamo?" Jake Morrison stood at the viewing port of the human transport ship, watching the massive Galactic Council station grow larger as they approached. The station was enormous, easily the size of a small moon, with countless docking bays and communication, arrays jutting out from its metallic surface like the spines of some great space creature. Admiral Lisa Kane joined him at the window, her uniform crisp and her expression serious. "You sure about this, Jake?" she asked quietly. "We both know this could be a trap." Jake adjusted his diplomatic jacket and smiled slightly. "Of course it could. Be Lisa. But that's exactly why they chose me for this job." His voice was calm and measured, the tone of a man who had faced danger many times before. "Besides, someone has to be the first human to sit at their big, important table." The station's traffic control directed their ship toward a smaller docking bay, one clearly meant for less important visitors. Jake noticed this detail but said nothing. He had been studying the Galactic Council for months, learning about each species and their customs. The reptilian saurians were proud and looked down on younger species. The insectoid Mantari valued order and hierarchy above all else. The gaseous ethereals considered themselves intellectually superior to all solid matter life forms. Captain Ryan Blake approached them as the ship began its final docking sequence. "Sir, I've got security teams ready to escort you to the station, but the Council is insisting that only you and one aide can attend the initial meeting." Jake nodded as if he had expected this. "That's fine, Captain. Danny Torres will come with me. Have the rest of our people stay on the ship and maintain regular communication schedules." He paused and looked directly at Ryan. "If something goes wrong, you follow Admiral Kane's orders." "Understood." The docking bay was sterile and cold when they stepped off their ship. Jake wore simple diplomatic robes, while Danny carried a case containing humanity's formal application for council membership. They were met by a group of alien security guards who looked more like soldiers than escorts. The guards were from different species, all armed and all watching the humans with obvious suspicion. Their escort led them through corridors that seemed designed to intimidate visitors. The walls were covered with images of the Council's member species, their great achievements, and their vast territories. Jake noticed that there were no images of humans anywhere, as if their species simply did not exist in the Council's view of the galaxy. The Council chamber was even more impressive than Jake had imagined. It was a vast circular room with seats, arranged in tiers, each section designed for different types of alien physiology. At the center was a raised platform where speakers could address the assembled representatives. The air hummed with translation devices and the soft sounds of dozens of different species communicating. High Chancellor Morden was waiting for them on the central platform. The insectoid leader stood nearly 8 feet tall, his chitinous armor gleaming under the chamber's lights. His compound eyes fixed on Jake with what could only be described as disdain. Around the chamber, representatives from 50 different species watched the proceedings with various levels of interest. "So you are the human who thinks his species deserves a place among civilized beings." Morden's voice came through the translation system with a harsh clicking undertone. "How amusing." Jake stepped forward and bowed slightly, a gesture of respect he had practiced many times. "Honored Chancellor, I am Jake Morrison, representing the United Human Colonies. We come before this council seeking membership and the opportunity to contribute to galactic peace and prosperity. A sound like laughter came from the Saurian section. Councillor Vextar rose from his seat, his scaled hide a deep green color that Jake knew indicated aggression in his species. "Contribute," Vextar hissed. What could a species barely 2 centuries old possibly contribute to those of us who have sailed the stars for millennia? Jake maintained his diplomatic composure, though those who knew him well might have noticed his smile become slightly more fixed. "We offer fresh perspectives, new technologies, and a willingness to learn from our more experienced neighbors." He gestured toward Danny, who stepped forward with the application documents. "Our formal application details our scientific achievements, our expansion capabilities, and our desire for peaceful coexistence." The documents were examined by several council members using various scanning devices. Jake could see from their expressions that they were not impressed. The ethereal representative, a being of shifting gases contained within a transparent suit, spoke in a voice like wind through crystals. "Your application shows a species driven by expansion and resource acquisition," the ethereal said. "Your brief history is marked by constant warfare among your own kind. Why should we believe you capable of civilized behavior among superior species?" Jake had prepared for this question. "Our internal conflicts taught us valuable lessons about cooperation and peace. We learned that working together produces better results than fighting each other. We hope to apply these lessons on a galactic scale." More laughter came from around the chamber, this time from multiple species. Jake noticed that only a few representatives seemed sympathetic to humanity's request. Most looked at him with the kind of expression one might reserve for an annoying child who had wandered into an important meeting. Councillor Vextar stood again, his tail swishing in what Jake recognized as a threatening gesture. "Your species shows all the signs of a dangerous expansion culture. You multiply rapidly, consume resources without restraint, and solve problems through violence. Perhaps the galaxy would be safer if your expansion were limited before it becomes a threat to established civilizations." The chamber fell quiet at these words. Jake felt Danny tense beside him, but he kept his own expression neutral. "I hope the Council will consider our application fairly, based on our actions and intentions rather than assumptions about our nature." High Chancellor Morden clicked his mandibles together in what Jake knew was a dismissive gesture. "Your application will be reviewed, human, but do not expect quick acceptance. Species must prove themselves worthy of Council membership through years of careful observation and testing. Perhaps in a few decades, if your kind shows proper respect. For your betters, we might consider a probationary status." Jake bowed again, though his smile had become somewhat sharper. "We appreciate the Council's consideration and look forward to demonstrating humanity's value as a galactic neighbor." As they were escorted from the chamber, Jake could hear the representatives discussing humanity in terms that ranged from dismissive to openly hostile. Several mentioned the need to monitor human expansion more closely, while others suggested that younger species needed to be taught their proper place in the galactic order. Back in their guest quarters aboard the station, Danny finally spoke up. "Sir, they're not going to accept us, are they? This whole thing was just for show." Jake looked out the window at the stars beyond the station. His smile had not changed, but something in his eyes had grown colder. "No, Danny, I don't think they had any intention of accepting us as equals." He activated his communication device and began composing a message to Admiral Kane. "But that's exactly what we expected, isn't it?" The message he sent was carefully worded, diplomatic language that would seem innocent to anyone monitoring their communications. But Jake knew that Lisa would understand every coded phrase. The real mission was just beginning, and the Galactic Council had no idea what they had just set in motion by treating humanity with such contempt. Outside their window, human ships maintained their positions at the edge of the system, waiting for Jake's signal and ready to show the galaxy exactly what happened when someone threatened the wrong species. The second day of negotiations began with what appeared to be a more formal session. Jake Morrison arrived at the council chamber to find that the seating arrangement had been changed. Instead of standing on the central platform, he and Danny Torres were directed to a small section clearly marked for petitioners and lesser species. The message was obvious and insulting, but Jake simply smiled and took his seat without complaint. High Chancellor Morden called the session to order with a series of sharp clicks that echoed through the vast chamber. Today we will discuss the terms under which humanity might be permitted to exist peacefully within council space. The way he said it made it clear that this was not a negotiation, but a list of demands. Councillor Vextar rose from his elevated position, a data pad in his clawed hands. After careful consideration of human expansion patterns and territorial claims, the Council has determined that several of your recent colony worlds lie within zones that should rightfully belong to more established species. His scaled hide had darkened to an even deeper green, indicating extreme aggression. You will evacuate the systems of Kepler 438, Ross 128, and Proxima Centauri within 1 standard year. Danny shifted uncomfortably beside Jake, but the human diplomat maintained his calm expression. Those worlds were uninhabited when we arrived, and we have invested considerable resources in making them suitable for human life. Perhaps we could discuss compensation or shared development rights. The chamber erupted in sounds that Jake's translator interpreted as various forms of laughter and scorn. The ethereal representative spoke in their wind-like voice. Compensation. How typical of a primitive species to think in terms of material exchange. You will leave because we tell you to leave. That should be sufficient reason for any civilized being. Jake nodded thoughtfully, as if considering their words. I understand the Council's position, but I must point out that those colonies now house over 12 million human civilians. Moving that many people would require careful planning and significant time. Councillor Vextar slammed his tail against the floor, a gesture that in Saurian culture indicated extreme displeasure. The welfare of your civilians is not our concern. If you had not overextended your expansion, this would not be necessary. Perhaps losing a few colonies will teach humans the price of arrogance. Another representative, a crystalline being from the Mineral Confederation, added their voice to the discussion. Furthermore, all human military vessels will be limited to patrol craft no larger than frigate class. Your larger warships will be surrendered to Council forces for recycling into useful materials. Jake's smile became slightly more pronounced, though he kept his voice level and diplomatic. That would leave humanity unable to defend our remaining colonies from pirates and raiders. Surely the Council understands the need for basic security. High Chancellor Morden clicked his mandibles in what Jake recognized as amusement. Security will be provided by Council peacekeeping forces for a reasonable fee, of course. Your species will be placed under protective custody until you prove capable of responsible behavior. The true nature of the Council's intentions was becoming clear. This was not about peaceful coexistence or galactic harmony. This was about subjugation. about reducing humanity to the status of a client species that existed only at the pleasure of their alien overlords. Jake noticed that several council members were watching him carefully, as if waiting for an angry outburst or desperate pleading. Instead, Jake leaned back in his chair and asked a seemingly innocent question. "I'm curious about the enforcement mechanisms for these requirements. How many peacekeeping vessels does the Council maintain in this sector?" The question seemed to catch the Council off guard. Vextar exchanged glances with several other representatives before answering. "The Council maintains sufficient forces to ensure compliance with all regulations. The exact numbers are not relevant to this discussion." Jake nodded as if satisfied with the answer, though Danny noticed his superior was making small notes on his datapad. "Of course, I was simply trying to understand the logistics involved. Moving 12 million people is quite an undertaking, and coordinating with peacekeeping forces would be essential." Commander Alex Hunt, who had been sitting quietly in the observer section, felt a chill run down his spine. He had served with Jake Morrison in military intelligence for 5 years, and he recognized that tone of voice. Jake was no longer acting as a diplomat seeking council membership. He was gathering intelligence on potential targets. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the expedition's xenobiologist, was monitoring alien body language and pheromone emissions from her position in the gallery. What she saw troubled her deeply. The council members were displaying signs of predatory satisfaction, the kind of biochemical responses associated with hunting behavior rather than diplomatic negotiation. As the session continued, the council's demands became increasingly unreasonable. Humans would be required to share all technological developments with council oversight committees. Human ships would be restricted to designated shipping lanes. Human colonies would accept alien administrators to ensure proper governance. Each new requirement was presented as a generous concession from superior beings to their primitive subjects. Jake listened to each demand with apparent calm, occasionally asking technical questions about implementation or timeline. To the council members, he seemed like a man slowly accepting the inevitable reality of human inferiority. They had no way of knowing that every question was designed to extract crucial information about Council military capabilities, response times, and strategic weaknesses. "There is one final matter," High Chancellor Morden announced as the session neared its end. "The Council has detected what appear to be unauthorized human vessels at the edge of this system. As a gesture of good faith, you will order them to depart immediately." Jake's expression remained neutral, but something flickered behind his eyes. "Those are escort vessels providing security for our diplomatic mission. Standard protocol for any species visiting a potentially hostile environment." The chamber fell silent at the word hostile. Councillor Vextar rose slowly from his seat, his scales now so dark they were almost black. "Did you just refer to the Galactic Council as hostile human?" Jake stood as well, his diplomatic smile never wavering. "I simply meant that we are far from home, surrounded by unknown species with unknown intentions. Basic military doctrine suggests maintaining security forces nearby during important negotiations." Security Chief Kral Nock, a massive alien who looked like a cross between a bear and a rhinoceros, stepped forward from his position near the chamber walls. "Perhaps the human delegation needs to be reminded of proper respect for Council authority." Several guards moved to surround Jake's small group, their weapons clearly visible. Danny Torres instinctively stepped closer to his superior, but Jake remained perfectly still, his hands clasped behind his back in a relaxed posture. "I apologize if my words caused offense," Jake said, his voice carrying just a hint of something that might have been amusement. We humans sometimes struggle with the subtle nuances of diplomatic language. Perhaps the Council would prefer more direct communication. High Chancellor Morden studied the human diplomat carefully. There was something different about Morrison now, something that had not been present during the previous day's session. The human still wore the same diplomatic smile, but there was a quality to it that made the insectoid leader's compound eyes twitch with unease. You and your delegation will remain on this station until we receive confirmation that your military vessels have departed Council space, Morden declared. Consider yourselves guests under protective custody. Jake's smile broadened slightly, and for just a moment it looked less like diplomatic courtesy and more like the expression of a predator who had just confirmed that his prey was exactly where he wanted them to be. Of course, Chancellor. We are honored to extend our stay and learn more about Council hospitality.